We're here in the beautiful office of Cyber Capital in center of Amsterdam with Justin Bonds. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
All right. What's actually the outlook on 2019?
Well, I think I might sound like a broken record here, but I'm always tend to be very positive on my outlook on the future. So, in the same sense, I'm bullish again, and I feel very positive about the technology, and it's just a matter of time and patience for more people to realize what we're doing in this space. So, in that sense, I'm very hopeful towards 2019, and things keep on getting better. The fundamentals keep improving. We keep creating better protocols and upgrades, and I think that's kind of the nature and spirit of things. That often, the price goes down and people feel very down about these things, but if you look at things fundamentally, things do just keep improving. So in that sense, I feel very positive about what's happening, and that's really what matters, I think, in the end. So I think maybe 2019, if I were to give a projection, I see more success in people adopting Dapps. So people using different applications, not necessarily being aware that they're even using cryptocurrency, like as opposed to people adopting it as a currency and as a means of exchange. Even though I think that aspect is still very important for a cryptocurrency, especially in the first world, I see Dapps driving adoption more than its actual use as a currency. I will say that in some countries like Venezuela and some African countries, for instance, cryptocurrency as a currency is more compelling, I think, for everyday people when you have hyperinflation and all these type of things. So I think the same is true in the West, that when these financial systems go wrong, cryptocurrency becomes a lot more appealing. But predicting that, in the developed world is not as straightforward as doing that in a failing economy like Venezuela, for instance. So.
Are there actually other applications possible besides playing a gamble Dapp or a betting Dapp?
Well, I will say that gambling Dapps are very promising, because it's one of those use cases that actually where you actually might require an uncensorable, immutable type blockchain, that is separate from maybe systems of law where gambling might be illegal. So I will say that gambling actually is a significant application of this technology, even though I'm not a gambler myself. I'm a fund manager, but I do see a distinction there, fortunately. But besides from gambling applications, I'm seeing a lot of really interesting applications in terms of things like decentralized oracles, things like stable tokens, like projects like MakerDAO. I still find extremely interesting.
What makes them interesting, actually?
Well, the volatility, right, of cryptocurrency is very problematic. So, if you want to create a Dapp in cryptocurrency and you don't want that volatility, you can achieve that with the DAI token. So you can have both the advantages of decentralization and censorship resistance and having true ownership over your wealth, while at the same time bypassing the volatility, which I think is still very, for normal consumers, it's not something that they're mostly very comfortable with. So if you have a Dapp that maybe, you have to load your balance, you have to load your wallet, maybe like an Uber, for instance, a decentralized Uber might be an example. It might make more sense using something like DAI as a currency for the average consumer than it would be a more volatile asset like Ethereum. So I think in that sense, it's a more user-friendly experience. Now, I'd like to expand on that, because things like DAI also allow things like crypto loans to occur. There's a whole range of different financial tools that can actually be built on top of such a system, including things like futures and these type of financial tools. So the application of the DAI token are actually far-reaching, far more than just, hey, we have a stable token. Actually, the consequences of that are actually far greater. In a lot of cases, so for us, token economics are very important, right? So something can be like a really good project and maybe have a really good prospect in terms of their business, but the token itself attached to it might not necessarily always be a good investment. And as far as I've seen, I question the need to actually have a token for such a loan type system. This might be a case where having a centralized body that you kind of take the loan against actually makes a lot of sense. And because you're taking a loan against a centralized company, the token becomes redundant in many ways. There's been a very interesting development recently, which I think relates to this. I'm not sure if your viewers are familiar with what happened to 0x protocol recently. So what happened with 0x protocol is a great example of this, is that in order for a token economic system to work, there needs to be a really strong case for that token. And obviously, I think I've explained token economics before, how we need to have mechanisms within the protocol that create demand for that token if that token is being used. That's one of the definitions we apply for good token economics. But what happened with 0x specifically is actually that a bunch of people actually forked the token out of the protocol. And now they're saying, no, we can actually have this exchange protocol but without the token. So if we're in a situation where the token doesn't provide enough utility, it can simply be forked out of the system, and it becomes redundant and therefore not a good investment. So for all decentralized applications, a token that you can invest in doesn't always necessarily make sense. And I feel this is the case with most kind of loan type configurations as well, because in most cases the token economics don't always make sense and not necessarily required. It's always an important question to ask ourselves when we're investing in a decentralized project: does this need to be decentralized? Because that always comes with trade-offs. Like, centralized systems tend to scale better, for instance, so it comes with trade-offs. And if you don't require to make those trade-offs, then it doesn't necessarily make sense in that sense.
So if we round up, actually, we're talking about adoption. We have an outlook for 2019. If we round it up, what other applications do you see? What are then, for instance, Dapps? I mean,
in terms of other applications, I think it tends to be very far-reaching. I mentioned things like a decentralized Uber, for instance, decentralized streaming services, social networks with incentive mechanisms built in. I'm quite fond of that idea because I think it provides some strong returns in that sense. Obviously,
do you have an example?
Well, Steemit is obviously an old example of that. So Steemit takes part of the block reward and then rewards that to content creators. Like, that to me is interesting, and this is kind of an extension of, hey, we have this block reward, we have this inflation, we can do something with it. And I think that's what DAOs do for a large part. So I'm very interested in DAOs as a way of organizing a business, as a way of creating cooperation between disparate groups that in an adversarial environment, really. And
why are DAOs so important? I mean, if you compare it to the normal world between brackets.
Right. So I think part of why DAOs are important, and I know this is an unpopular opinion, but it's blockchains need governance, because blockchains need to be able to change. Blockchains need to be able to adapt. And if you don't have a DAO construction, if you don't have a decentralized governance structure, then it's human nature that in the vacuum of power, some group will have power, right? I think, like, you hear a lot of people saying that, oh, no politics in blockchain. But I think what people fail to realize is that when you say no politics, that's actually a political position. So in many ways, politics can't be escaped. So I think it's better to it's better to embrace that. It's better to embrace that, yes, we do need governance, right? And how do we achieve good governance? And in that regard, I consider what we generally consider DAOs to have a good governance structure, where you have shareholders who have incentives, you have fee or dividend mechanisms, and you even have participants can even be punished if they don't act, according to what's in the best interest of the network. So in that sense, I really see a DAO as being something that can help, govern networks. So in that sense, like, if I use something like Dash as an example, which I consider one of the first DAOs, that's something that has a DAO built in as part of its governance process. And that to me avoids a lot of the problems that we've been seeing. I feel like two of the biggest problems we have in blockchain today is obviously, we need to work on scaling. I don't think anyone can deny that. But the second, or maybe even the biggest problem we have, is actually governance in many ways, is how do we govern these protocols? How do we, find the Goldilocks zone of blockchain governance in terms of something that's not too easy to change, but also not too hard to change, and something that brings about changes that are actually beneficial for the network. Like, and I think I mentioned this before about how maybe I have my doubts about proof of work and how effective that is as a form of governance. The recent split that occurred in BSV, for instance, I felt was not an ideal outcome for, maybe how a blockchain should be governed. And that, I feel, are problems that I feel like DAOs can solve.